Okay, let's start with a really challenging question, one posed right in the title of Joyce Vance's book. When things feel fragile, when the political struggle feels endless, is giving up really unforgivable?
It's a powerful question for right now, isn't it? We're going to dig into that book today. Giving up is unforgivable. Vance, she's got quite the background. Former U.S. attorney, teaches constitutional law. You see her as a legal analyst.
Yeah, she brings a lot of weight to it. And our mission today is really to unpack her argument using a pretty rigorous framework. We want to look at the claims, the ethical vision, and whether it all holds together logically.
Exactly. And her central point, her thesis, it's crystal clear. We have to stay engaged actively, consistently to protect the republic. We need to fight off that feeling of despair, that cynicism that can creep in when democracy seems under threat.
It's definitely not just theory, it's political nonfiction, right?
Right.
Blending history, law, and some very practical advice for citizens.
Right. And the timing is key here. We should be clear, this book came out directly responding to what Vance sees as real, current threats to American democratic institutions.
And this analysis is particularly relevant if you're following the big debates around potential government reforms, things like Project 2025, which proposes some major changes.
Yeah.
Vance is offering a strong counter-narrative rooted in the Constitution.
Definitely. And just a note as we get started, you're experiencing a unique two-voice AI conversation powered by Google's NotebookLM. The whole idea is to provide a deeper, more dynamic kind of book analysis.
Right, aiming for reflection, for rational thought, which feels pretty essential right now, similar to the approach in our mindful moments analyses over on our YouTube channel.
Exactly. Inspiring that kind of thinking.
Okay, so let's dive into her main warning, this threat of complacency. How does she argue that democracy becomes fragile? Is it a sudden thing?
No, not at all. And that's key. She argues it's gradual, often dismissed because it happens in small steps. People don't really notice the danger until it's, well, maybe too late.
She uses that classic analogy, doesn't she? The boiling frog.
She does. It's unsettling, but effective. The idea is the political heat, the erosion of norms. It increases so slowly that the public, like the frog, just gets used to it, complacent. Then suddenly, escape seems impossible. She backs this up by looking at history, times when constitutional norms were subtly undermined.
That sounds pretty alarming. So if the picture is that urgent, how did she manage to land on optimism? How could she say giving up is unforgivable without sounding like she's ignoring the risks? Is it just blind faith?
That's a fair question, but no, it's not blind faith. Her optimism is, let's call it strategic optimism. It's grounded. She points to major democratic wins in the past. Think about the abolition of slavery, the expansion of civil rights.
Real, tangible victories.
Exactly. Proof that sustained collective effort works, even when the odds look, frankly, impossible. She uses these historical examples to show it can be done.
Okay, but some might argue, looking at the current landscape, the scale of money and power involved, is focusing on individual actions, like voting or local engagement really enough. Doesn't that feel a bit small compared to the need for systemic change?
That's a really important critique, and she doesn't totally dismiss it, but Vance argues that those big systemic changes we admire, like civil rights, they were actually built on countless individual actions, local organizing, years of persistence.
So the individual is the foundation.
Precisely. She holds up figures like John Lewis, like Nelson Mandela, not just as icons, but as models of that resilience. And crucially, she connects that history directly to things readers can do now. Voting, yes, but also other forms of civic engagement, all grounded in, legal understanding and historical context. The individual action builds toward the systemic.
That combination of history and law seems central. It leads us right into the legal and ethical core of her argument and our critique. How does she use the Constitution itself to frame this not just as a preference, but as a duty?
This is really where her legal background comes into play. Our analysis used what we called the preamble clause diagnostic. Essentially, Vance takes the preamble to the Constitution, we the people, and uses it not just as an introduction, but as a kind of active checklist for civic responsibility today.
Interesting. Can you break that down? How do those famous clauses apply to, say, activism?
Okay, so form a more perfect union. For Vance, that's not about nostalgia for the past. It's a command for constant improvement, for unity, for proactive engagement. It means work.
Right. Not just preserving, but perfecting.
Exactly. Then establish justice. She connects that directly to defending the rule of law. It means paying attention to things like judicial appointments, laws that might undermine equal protection. It's about vigilance.
And what about the mood of the country, the sort of fatigue or cynicism?
That links to ensure domestic tranquility. She warns that letting cynicism or political exhaustion take over actually threatens tranquility. It's not just about riots in the streets. Internal passivity is also a danger.
And provide for the common defense. Usually we think military.
But Vance frames it much broader. Consistent activism, staying engaged, holding leaders accountable, that is part of the common defense. You're defending the constitutional order itself by participating.
That really shifts the perspective. Does she bring in fairness, equity?
Absolutely. Under promote general welfare, she really focuses on how democratic erosion hits marginalized communities hardest. It underscores the stakes for the least advantaged. And finally, secure the blessings of liberty. It all comes back to protecting those fundamental freedoms, individual and collective, that are at risk when the rule of law falters. It's a really comprehensive use of that foundational text.
Beyond the legal text itself, there's the way she presents her case. We looked at this through what's called an Adlerian epistemic lens, basically, how she distinguishes between different kinds of knowing. How does she build credibility in such a polarized time?
Well, she seems to understand that you need intellectual honesty to make a convincing moral argument. Her core points, the really actionable ones, aren't just presented as her opinion. She works hard to ground them in legal precedent, her own experience as a prosecutor, and importantly, in observable patterns of democratic decline that others have documented too.
So trying to separate fact from just political spin.
Yes, trying to help the reader see the difference between, say, an informed judgment based on evidence, knowledge, or understanding versus just raw opinion. And this focus on evidence then leads to her calls for action, which connect to what Adler called practical wisdom. The idea is that clear thinking should lead to right action.
This focus on action and consequence brings us to the ethical standard we applied, the Golden Rule assessment. What's the core moral demand the book makes?
It really asks the reader to engage their empathy, to pause and genuinely imagine. What would it be like for you, for your family, for the most vulnerable people in your community if democratic safeguards really weaken significantly?
So it's asking, if I sit this out, what am I implicitly accepting for others?
Exactly that. It's about reciprocity. The ethical question becomes, would the people with the least power be better off if everyone engaged as actively as Vance is urging? She makes the point that inaction isn't neutral. It's a choice, and it has consequences, potentially severe ones, for other people.
Okay, this obviously touches on some very charged political ground. Let's talk about logical consistency. Given her book is, in part, a response to specific political movements or proposals, how does she handle the argument that her call for civic engagement is just partisanship in disguise?
That's a key criticism, and it needs to be addressed. Within her own framework, the idea that engagement is about preserving institutions, not parties, her logic is generally consistent.
Right.
However, critics, understandably, might see her legal interpretations through their own partisan lens and argue it is one-sided.
Does she acknowledge that complexity, or does she just push her main point?
No, she does acknowledge it, and this is important for the book's credibility, I think. She specifically warns about ignoring other viewpoints, and maybe more practically, she addresses the very real risk of activist burnout.
So she doesn't pretend it's easy.
Not at all. She actually includes advice on self-care, recognizing that this kind of sustained engagement requires managing your own well-being. It shows a nuance and understanding that resilience is needed for the long haul, not just passionate rhetoric for a moment.
That brings us nicely to the wisdom assessment, thinking about the longer-term impact. If people really take her message to heart, what's the intended outcome?
The big goal is clearly to inspire sustained, thoughtful civic engagement. The hope is that this kind of ongoing participation reinforces democratic norms, makes institutions more resilient even when facing serious challenges. Ethically, the wisdom she's promoting is about taking responsibility, avoiding passive complicity, and actively nurturing that collective resilience. It's about playing the long game.
We've covered a lot: history, law, ethics, logic. Let's try to boil it down. What did our critique identify as the book's main strengths and weaknesses? Need that balanced perspective.
Okay, strengths first. The critique definitely highlighted her clear analysis of current threats. Also, the inspirational tone it pushes back against despair. The practical guidance is strong, and it's all grounded effectively in those legal and constitutional principles.
And the weaknesses. Where does the critique suggest caution?
The main points were that it might perhaps underplay the arguments of opposing political viewpoints at times, and maybe it doesn't fully grapple with the sheer scale of systemic change needed, which might require more than individual action alone.
Although, as you said, she does connect individual to systemic.
Right. And the critique concluded her optimism isn't naive, it's structured, based on historical examples of collective action succeeding. So, nuanced, not simplistic.
Okay, so key insights. If someone listening takes away just a few things from Vance's message, what should they be?
First, I'd say the idea that democracy's health really hinges on actively resisting cynicism. That giving up, feeling hopeless, is corrosive. It's just not presented as a viable option.
Right. Active resistance to despair itself.
Second, resilience is crucial, but it's both personal and collective, meaning taking care of yourself is important, but so is solidarity with others. You need both for a long struggle.
Makes sense. And the final piece.
That true ethical engagement isn't just reacting emotionally. It requires reflection, empathy, grounding your actions in democratic principles and facts, not just the latest outrage. Sustained, principled participation.
The book makes a powerful case for action, but like any work, it can't answer everything. That leaves us with some unresolved questions, things for you, the listener, to think about further.
Yeah, definitely. One big one is, for all the emphasis on individual and local action, can that kind of decentralized effort really be enough to counter large-scale, well-organized, well-funded movements that might aim to undermine democratic norms?
That's the scale question.
Exactly. And maybe more personally, for anyone inspired to take on this work, how do you actually avoid burnout in what feels like a potentially endless struggle? How do you balance that need for self-care Vance mentions with the relentless vigilance she also demands? It's a real tension.
Those are important questions. If you want to explore different angles, maybe challenge some of Vance's points, we'd suggest looking at primary constitutional sources yourself, reading recent analyses of current administration policies from various viewpoints, and maybe checking out some social psychology work on activism and resilience.
Absolutely. Thinking critically, reflecting ethically, it feels more important than ever. And remember, you can find more AI-driven book analyses like this, designed for reflection, in the genre-based Mindful Moments on our YouTube channel.
We definitely encourage you to find the book summary we've prepared, subscribe to our podcast for more mindful moments, and please share this analysis if you found it useful. There's also a link if you'd like to purchase the book.
So we'll leave you with this final thought to chew on. We've talked a lot about the burden of action, the weight of staying engaged, but flip it around. If democracy really is as fragile as Vance suggests, what's the true cost, not just to us now, but down the line, of inaction? Think about that. We'll catch you next time.